Hello friends, this is seventh lecture of Unit 1 and this is final lecture. So in this lecture I will cover transaction in database management system and simple introduction of client server architecture and what is basically responsibility of a database administrator. So in database management system, a transaction is a set of logical operation performed to access and modify the contents of the database as per the request. So whenever you are writing any query as like insert, delete, update, or selecting something, basically these are example of transaction because here we are ready to perform transactions. Suppose I am accessing data from the database means I am just reading the data. If I am writing, inserting, and updating the data means that is also example of transaction. So when we discuss how the database transaction works, so uh, basically, there are two type of measure of operation performed by the database management system. One is read and write. Read means basically we are accessing the data, and write means just inserting and updating the data. And also, database management system has a property that is ACID property. So transaction must be atomic, consistent, isolated, and durable. So these property ensure that the database is always in a reliable and consistent state. And third one is commit or rollback. So a transaction and with a commit or rollback. So a commit means your transaction is just completed, and rollback means your transaction is just failed, and rollback reverse the changes made by the transaction. So also here in this picture you can see uh, before the any transaction your database in consistent state, okay, where your transaction begin start. So temporarily your data may be in inconsistent state, and after end of transaction means after completion of a transaction your data will be consistent state. If before the transaction your database is inconsistent state, so after transaction that should be inconsistent state, because we have four properties and any transaction mechanism have to follow this. First one is atomic, second is consistency, third is isolated, and last one is durability. Okay, so we will discuss in next slide one by one. Okay, now there is some fact about the transaction. So a transaction is a program unit whose education may or may not change the contents of the database. Yes, okay. Suppose you are selecting means here we are not changing the uh, contents of database, but when you are inserting, so we are changing. So uh, may or may not change. The transaction concept in DMS is quoted as single unit. Single unit means here we are talking about atomic. Either your transaction will be completed, either that will be fail. There is no concept half execution and half fail, that there is no completion. It will be done or not done. If the database operation do not update the database but only retrieve the data, this type of transaction is called read-only transaction. And a successful transaction can change the database from one consistent state to another consistent state. If the database were in inconsistent state before a transaction, it would remain in the inconsistent state after the transaction. Now, this is state of transaction. By this picture, you can easily understand how your transaction is going to work. Okay, so first one is when you start writing any query, this is called active state. So here you can see this is one state. Okay, when you are writing any insert query or update query, you are selecting, just pressing an execute button. That time your query is in partially committed state, because query is going on but that is not reflected in database. When that reflected in database means that is committed state, your transaction is completed and then terminated. Means now again you can write another query, you can execute. So this is a simple one process. Okay, here you can see. Now second is what happens. Suppose you have write uh, any query, just press on execute button and you got a error. In lab we have seen you are writing, if there is any command error, just execute and button in below error uh, is when you can see the message, yes, this is invalid object, something like this. Means here your transaction is failed, and that comes under the failed state. Then rollback means uh, uh, whatever state of database earlier before the execution of that particular query, that will be rollback, and the query will be aborted, and that comes under the terminated state. This is second. Third thing, what happened? Suppose you are writing a query and your just power failures or something just crack, means your transaction is fail, and that's come under the fail state, rollback and aborted and terminated. So basically there are three scenario you can see. First one is from active, partial committed, committed and terminated state. Second is active state, partially committed state, failed state, rollback, aborted state and terminated. Third one is active state, failure, failed state, rollback and aborted. Now what is active state? So this is the first stage of a transaction. When the transaction instruction are being executed, operations such as insertion, deletion, or updation are performed during this state. During this state, the data record are under the manipulation and they are not saved to the database. Rather, they remain somewhere in a buffer in the main memory. Partially committed means the transaction has finished its final operation, but the changes are still not saved in the database. After completing all the read and write operation, the modification are initially stored in the main memory or a local buffer. If the changes are made permanent on the database, then the state will be changed to committed state, and in case of the failure, it will go in failed state. If any transaction related operation cause an error during the active or partially committed state, further execution of the transaction is stopped and it is brought into a failed state. Here, the database recovery system makes sure that the database is in consistent state. Aborted means if a transaction reaches the failed state due to failed check, the database recovery system will attempt to restore it to consistent state. If the recovery is not possible, the transaction is either rolled back or cancelled to ensure the database remains consistent. In the aborted state, the database recovery system perform one of two actions. The system terminates the transaction to prevent it from affecting other operation, or after the making necessary adjustment, the system revert the transaction to an active state and attempt to continue its execution. Now committed. So this state of transaction is achieved when all the transaction related operations have been executed successfully along with the commit operation, and data is saved into the database after the required manipulation in this state, and this makes the successful completion of the transaction. Terminated state means if there is not any rollback or the transaction comes from the committed state, then the system is consistent and ready for new transaction, and the old transaction is terminated. Now, this is basically a process. By this simple diagram, also you can easily understand how this is going to work. Here, begin transaction with write, and transaction means that is partially committed. After committed, and this is committed state, then your operation is terminated. Now it's ready for new operation. Here you can see begin transaction, partially committed. Your system is in suppose fail, then it comes under the terminated. Here, third one also here you can see. So, once a transaction state execution, it's become active. It can issue read or write operation. Once the read and write operation complete, the transaction become partially committed state. Next, some recovery protocols need to be ensured that the system failure will not result in a inability to record changes in transaction permanently. If this check is success, the transaction commits and enter into the committed state. If the check is fail, the transaction go to the fail state. If the transaction is aborted while it's in the active state, it goes to the fail state and the transaction should be rolled back to undo the effect of its right operation on the database, and the terminated state of refers to transaction leaving the system. Now, just taking an example, by this example, you can easily understand how your active and uh, partially committed state is working. Suppose there are two person, uh, you know, a user want to transfer 500 from account A to account B. So, what is the active state? So, in active state, a transaction begun. Is read the balance of account A, check if it has enough funds. Example, read balance account A equal to 1000 rupees. Means in active state, we know the account A has 1000 rupees. Now, what is falsely committed state? Just user want to deduct 500 from the account A balance, mean that will become 500, and temporarily update account B balance added 500. Okay. Now, what is committed state? So after completion of transaction, now A have 500 and B have 1500. Means changes are written in database. So this is a whole concept of transaction. Now, suppose if something goes wrong during the transaction, that can be power failure, system crash, the transaction moves to the state. So system crashing after detecting 500 from account A, but before adding to account B. Aborted state means the failed transaction is rolled back and the database is restored to its original state. So now example account A balance is restored to 1000 and no changes made to the account B. So by this simple transaction, you can understand how your every stage of transaction works. Now talking about acid property, that is most important properties of a transaction. So acid properties are used for maintaining the integrity of database during the transaction processes. Acid in database stand from atomicity, consistency, dilution, and durability. So atomicity means a transaction is a single unit of operation. You either execute it entirely and do not execute it all. There cannot be partial execution. Consistency means once the transaction is executed, it should move from one consistent state to another. Isolation means this property ensure that the multiple transactions can occur at a time without leading to the inconsistency of the database state. And durability means after successful completion of a transaction, the changes in the database should be persist even in the case of system failure. Now, this is uh, summary of acid properties. Okay, the entire transaction takes place at once or doesn't happen at all, and the database must be consistent before and after the transaction, and multiple transactions occur independently without interference, and the changes of a successful transaction occurs even the system failure occurs. Now just taking a simple example. So A means atomicity. So atomicity means that the entire transaction either takes place all at once or it doesn't occur at all. It means that there is no midway. The transaction can never occur partially. Every transaction can be considered as a single unit and they either run to completion and do not get executed at all. So we have following two operation here. One is commit. In case of transaction commits, the changes made are visible to us. Thus, atomicity is also called The all or nothing rule. Abort in case of transaction abort, the changes made to database are not visible to us. So here you can see this. This is simple examination example. Hmm. Okay. Before transaction, you know, there is a $30. Just debit 10, level 20. Just transfer. Here you can see before 100, credit 10, but available balance is 100. Means here your credit is fair. Okay. So this is not going to happen uh, in the transaction. It should be committed or should be not committed, because your balance is 20. Means this is example of a partial equation. Amount is debited from here but not credited here. Now taken just take second example. Here balance is 20. Here available balance is 1110. Means this is completed education. So this is example of transaction. Okay. Either transaction will be happen, either not. Now talking about consistency. Consistency means that we have to maintain the integrity constraint so that any given database stays consistent both before and after transaction. So just see here the simple example. Before A have 500, we have find 500. Just we are adding, that will be 700, and after transaction 400 plus 300 equal to 700. So before transaction that is also 700, or after transaction this is also 700. Means this is example of consistency. Now isolation means multiple operations can be performed. Isolation ensure that the occurrence of multiple transaction simultaneously without a database state leading to state of inconsistency. Means here we can say multiple operation can be performed in the database transaction. So just uh, you can see in the insert option, you can insert a single value at a time. Also you can insert multiple value at the same time. Okay. So basically this is example of isolation. Now talking about durability. So durability property state that once the execution of a transaction is completed, the modification and update on the database get written and stored in the disk. So these persist even after the occurrence of a system failure. Such update becomes permanent and get stored in non-volatile memory. Thus the effect of this transaction are never lost. Now talking about client server architecture. So we have already discussed many time in previous lecture what is meaning of client server architecture. Just I am trying to recap so you can easily understand what is basically this. So basically client server architecture refers to a network where many devices connected to a centralized server, allowing user to access different stored data and perform diverse tasks simultaneously. And the clients refer to the person or device requesting information, and the server refers to the device that provides this information. So a client server architecture follows a protocol known as a request response, which means the client requests information or data, and then the server provides the requested data. So, for example, when a client might visit a website, when that person enter the URL they want to see, the server requests and display the website domain. When you send an email, you essentially request the email server transmit email to the intended receiver. If you send a request that goes against what the server allows, the server can reject your request. You know, so client is basically a piece of software or application that takes the input and send request to the server. Server a piece of software that receive and process requests from the client, and there is a load balancer responsible for distributing incoming network traffic across the group of backend server to optimize resource usage, and network layer protocols such as TCP/IP. So here you can see this is uh, client, this is internet, this is load balancer. According to requests, this load balancer send that request to the particular server or database. Okay, and this is connected as well. So this is going to work. We have already discussed about the distributed concept of system. So here you can see, as per the request, server is defined on which service request has to go. Now, the flow of data is unidirectional and forms a cycle. It is usually initiated by the client requesting some kind of data and server processing request and sending some kind of data back to the client via protocol. So client cannot directly talk to each other. So basically what happen, a client requests data from the server, load balancer route the request to the appropriate server, and server processes the request. Client servers query appropriate data from the some data, and database return the query data back to the server, and the server process the data and send it to the client. And this process repeats. Means suppose there is a client just writing anything, load balancer inside this server, this go to database, and database just give the data that comes back, and then again this. So this is processor is going to happen, and this request can be go this same and this same. So this is process is repeating. Okay. Now how the browser interacts with the server. So there are a few steps to follow interacts with the server of a client. User enter the URL of the website or file. The browser then requests the domain name system server, and DNS servers look up for the address of that web server, and then the DNS server respond with the IP address of the web server, and the browser sends over an HTTP request to the web server provided by the DNS servers, and the server send over the necessary file for the website. So the browser then renders the file and website is displayed. This is rendering done with the help of document object model interpreter, CSS interpreter, and JS, colloquially known as a JIT compilers. So this is process how browser interacts with the server. Now this is last topic, that is database administrator. So basically what is the role of database administrator. So nowadays mostly company who are working on data, generally they used to hire the database administrator to manage their data. So database administrator basically design, implements, and monitor data management system, also ensure design consistency, quality, and security of the database. So a database administrator or DB for short design, implements, and monitors data management system and ensure consistency, quality, security, and compliance with the rules and regulation. And DB in database management involves installing, configuring, monitoring, maintaining, and improving the performance of a databases and data stores according to a skill framework for the information. Okay, the database administrator role has place in nearly every organization to at least some degree. The industry that employ the most people in database administrator include quick fields such as computer system design and information management. Many also work in information intensive businesses such as finance, insurance, and educational services. And the responsibility of database administrator is as like creating and maintaining database standard and policies, supporting database design, creation, and testing activities, managing the database availability and performance, defining the implementing event trigger that will alert on a potential database performance, or integrating issue, performing database housekeeping such as tuning, indexing, monitoring user transaction volume, response time, concurrency level, implementing security measures and frameworks, identifying, reporting, and managing database security issues, audit trail, and forensics, designing database backup, you know, and installing upgrade and patches to various applications. So these are some works of database administrator. Now, if you're talking about salary, so in May 2023, the salary of database administrator was near about 120, $1,20,000, means that is near about 1 crore uh, per annum, I think. Okay. And if you're talking about the qualification, so there should be some, have a background in computer science, information technology, or engineering, and are well versed with the structure theory language and relevant database technology. So this is enough for, this is enough for us to be a database administrator. So hope you got my all point. And if you have a query regarding, you can ask through the comment box. So thank you for watching this. Thank you.